Welcome everyone who's joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from.
I wrote a sticky note and put it on my computer that says, "Be the sponge."
There are some school-specific sponsorships which make you feel like more inclined towards them.
While you're an MBA, you have an unprecedented access to a lot of people, be it alums, recruiters, so your professors, your career services. Make the most out of your time, talk to people, get a clear understanding of what you want to go into.
Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us. Before we get going, I just want to put in a quick plug for the MBA Spotlight, which is coming up June 13th and 14th, the biggest MBA fair of 2023. Almost all the top 25 will be there and all the M7. So if you are interested, we encourage you to go ahead and register. The link is in the chat, and spots are limited. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of this early bird notification.
Great. Well, thank you, Catherine. So welcome, everyone. I'm Julia Brady, obviously joined by Catherine Tuttle, who you just met. And we are both from Fortuna Admissions. And Fortuna Admissions, as you may be aware, is a MBA and business master's consulting firm where we partner with prospective students really from all over the world. And I think a big differentiator of Fortuna is that we are, myself, Catherine, and many other folks on our team are members of admissions committees and leadership teams of just the top global institutions, top global MBA institutions. So Catherine spent time at Duke. I was at Kellogg School of Management and also worked at U Chicago, where I partnered closely with Chicago Booth, and I am a Chicago Booth alum. So as noted here, we have a lot of experience, but also when Fortuna is working with our clients, we're bringing the collective experience of all of our team. And so what we're going to talk with you about today, this sort of roadmap to round one, as we're starting to see some of the big schools release their application deadlines for September, this is the perfect time to really be getting going and starting that process. So we look forward to spending time with you today. And you'll see there's a live chat. And we welcome questions, comments throughout. We really want to make this engaging. So thank you for joining us today.
Perfect. I think we've gone through these. Those are our hosts and the Fortuna information, and we'll have this at the end as well. And just so you know, we have all of our previous sessions on YouTube, and if you want, we can put this link in the chat later. Many topics for you to peruse all about the MBA application process. So where to start? Julia?
Yeah. So, this is an important piece of the journey and questions we're often asked. And, really where to start is what we recommend is with reflection. And that is taking the time to really think through your motivations for an MBA. And even is an MBA the right path for you in sort of that next step on your academic career? Again, at Fortuna, many of us have worked with other programs beyond MBA. So there's sometimes, the specialized masters are becoming more and more important. So that's an important consideration, but also even thinking about the format too. But I think first and foremost, really taking that time to be reflective, Think about things in terms of what your strengths and weaknesses are. What are some of important aspects in your MBA journey or in your professional journey that you will want to make sure come clear as you're forming your application story. So I think just starting that, thinking about, do you need a coach or thought partner to walk you through this, where there might be potential gaps in your experience or story. So prepping will talk you through the specific steps, but we really do encourage our clients at this stage, first and foremost, to really reflect on what the MBA is going to do for you.
And like Julia said in the very beginning, you have time, which is so great. Like people,
Yes.
when I've been doing fit calls lately, people are, stressing, and they're saying, am I behind the 8 ball here? I feel like I'm just getting started. You have time.
Yes.
So let's, give you the steps that you need to take to move forward and make the most of the time that you have. So the first thing to think about is, how do you shape your target list of schools, right? We can't target all of the top 25, so trying to get that list narrowed down to schools that, you think could be a good fit. And there's a number of things to consider here. The first is geography. So geography, where do you want to be, during your MBA, and where do you want to be post MBA, and looking at the schools and where their alumni go after graduation. Do you want a big city or a small campus, right? Some people just really want to be in that big city like New York, and others prefer a smaller campus feel, a smaller town like Durham, where Duke is. There's no right or wrong. It's definitely, there's pros and cons to both of those. About your partner. If you have a partner that's going to be coming with you, will they be able to find work? A lot of us have the option these days to work remotely. Your partner may or may not have that option, or, may or may not prefer to work remotely. They might want to go into an office. So having that conversation and looking at the job market in that particular, in and around the schools that you're looking at. Career goals obviously are important. So looking at schools that have, specialties or areas of expertise in the industry or function that you are looking to enter into post MBA. For example, if healthcare is, top of mind, Duke has a fantastic health sector management program. MIT and Wharton are also known for healthcare. If you're looking at entrepreneurship, then a lot of folks like the California schools for that, because they're right in the thick of it with startups. But also MIT and Tepper are great options there as well. And so I think the key here is doing that research and then starting to get that list together, right? And having a mix, right? I'm all for the reach schools, right? And so if Harvard is your dream, go for it. But we also need to be realistic and have some safer options as well. So getting that list together, and then from there, narrowing down and doing your research.
Yeah, and just to build on that a bit, as you think about target schools as well, and this, and as you're reflecting on the MBA, Catherine raised important things in terms of, if you have considerations of a partner, geography, but also thinking about format and how that could shape things, because there's the traditional 2-year MBA. And particularly maybe if someone's coming from overseas, that could be a good option. If you're already in the US, I've worked with a number of students that have, maybe started looking at full-time and then decided to go part-time. And one in particular was very interested. His target schools were Haas and Stanford. And then during the course, and he was already in the Bay Area, he got a promotion and his company was poised to go public. And as we talked about it, it made more sense for him to go part-time and stay with that employer. And so he was able to apply to, and it was accepted and enrolled at Haas. Executive MBA is another consideration, depending on where you are in your career. So I think just wanted to float those as well as additional considerations.
And the 1-year programs
yes.
as well. Yes. I had a client who ended up looking at the 1-year program at Tepper, and NYU has one as well. So things to consider when you're maybe you're not making industry and functional change. Maybe the internship isn't such a huge thing for you. So things to keep in mind there. Julia, we got a question about how many schools one needs to target typically. I think I kind of think it depends on the person. I think having, really looking at gosh, how many you can handle. So where are you in the process? Looking at different rounds, and then also considering your recommenders. We don't want to ask them to write 16 letters of recommendation. I typically think, like 4 a round, typically where we end up. But
yeah,
I've also had a client do 15 schools.
Yeah.
Over 2 rounds.
Yes, I wouldn't, I think that's a great question. So thank you for asking that. Sorry, I was in I just went to the comments so I can see the questions more. But I think having some degree of focus. So having, Catherine, I loved how you mentioned, there's Harvard, and that's, even if you're perfectly well qualified, that can still end up being a reach just because of the sheer volume of applications. But especially as we're sitting here, so for this particular event, the 3rd week of May, so we're 3.5 to 4 months from round 1 deadlines. So I think for round 1, it is achievable. You may have the best kind of options to put your best foot forward if you're focusing on 2 or 3 schools for round 1, and then have that next list, and they could still be top schools if maybe there's another 2 to 3 or 2 to 4. So I think this idea of, total of 5 to 7 is a fairly reasonable amount, and looking at those, targeting between round 1 and round 2, and then as needed, does round 3 make sense? And we'll kind of talk about timeline, but I think, that, having a degree of focus. And again, and that is something that as we're working with clients, they often come to us with a starting list, but then we're helping them refine and also sequence those applications, because we might start on one like Stanford, pretty meaty application with a lot of sub questions. And that will, say working on that one first. If Stanford's on your list, we'll make those follow-up applications and essays more smoothly.
Yeah. And getting to that point in terms of, schools and how many and when to, apply, I think it helps to narrow the list when you start to engage with the schools. I think this is incredibly important in terms of you determining whether you'll be happy there for 2 years, or a year, or, every weekend, or whatever the case may be, and whether you see yourself as part of the community. But it's also really important from a school standpoint. So, Duke, for example, puts a lot of emphasis on engagement before applying. And they will even waive the application fee if you attend events or talk to current students or alumni. They also have links for current students and alumni to kind of endorse potential candidates that they speak with. So important on both sides of the equation. I tend to start with admissions ambassadors. A lot of schools have them, Duke, Yale, Tuck, UNC Keenan Flagler. These are folks who work with admissions. It's their job to talk with prospective students and answer their questions. And they typically have a profile so you can see what industry and function they were in previously and where they want to go post MBA and where they did an internship. So I would definitely encourage you to look for those folks. There's also information sessions, tons online now, and back on campus, which is exciting. So if you're nearby, you can always, schedule a visit. I would do a formal visit where the students will be there and you will have the opportunity to engage with them. Not required at all to be on campus if it's far away, but always a plus. I would say clubs are another great place. A lot of the clubs will actually have like a prospective student liaison, especially with schools that don't have the official admissions ambassadors. So checking their websites out, and then obviously looking at LinkedIn. A lot of the larger employers too have like previous employer networks that you can engage with. So, ex-Bain, that type of thing. And you can find those folks sometimes internally, if not on LinkedIn and other sources. But getting the opportunity to talk to people to figure out why they chose, that particular school, what has stood out to them about the culture, what activities have they gotten involved with, what faculty they've connected with, like that really will help you get a better sense of the culture there. I think online, a lot of it sounds very similar. Everybody's going to say they're collaborative and have amazing faculty, and they are, and they do. But it's amazing how, clients sometimes will come in and say, oh my gosh, I really want to go to Tuck or Duke or Tepper. And then they talk to some people and it just they don't gel the way they thought they would. Right. And so we tend to refine that list as we go based on, students' engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I see a few questions coming up in the chat about testing and where that is coming up very soon. We'll talk about that. But I do want to wait, again, in terms of there's fit, there is also, and this maybe goes to one of the questions, where someone said, well, what if, as you think about your entire kind of application package, test, GMAT, GPA, those things, they're important. But there are other things, again, all else being equal, one of the things that we really encourage is how do you stand out as an applicant? So as you're thinking about engaging with the schools to gauge fit, also think about it, as Catherine mentioned, with the ambassadors, you learn about them, but you're showing your interest. And really think about when considering, this goes back to why, we recommend a degree of focus with the schools you're applying to, so you can really make some strong connections with why this is the right exact school for you. And so an example, I worked with a candidate recently who had this he was definitely an entrepreneurial bent, but sort of with social impact. And so one of his target schools was University of Chicago. Chicago Booth has a Rostandi Center as well as Polsky of entrepreneurship, but they have a center on social impact. So he read up on that. He could put that into his application. It was something that could come out in his stories, both in writing and otherwise. So I think looking at these top schools, they often have publications you can sign up for, like Wharton has Knowledge at Wharton, Kellogg has Kellogg Insights. Sign up for those, because they will also, the more that you can sort of look at that intellectual engagement with the school, that can really help differentiate you and further tell your story.
Mm-hmm. And it also really helps with the essays too, especially the ones about how you plan to add value when you're on campus. It's really hard to answer those questions, in a meaningful way if you haven't connected with people there. In terms of, we just got another question that I don't think is coming up on a slide. So would 1-year MBA programs make more sense with 10 years of work experience?
I think so. Having worked closely with the 1-year MBA program at Kellogg, and there's a few others out there, it depends on the program. So if you have the sort of prerequisites, so the undergraduate business degree and the business courses that will qualify you for a 1-year MBA program, then I think that could make a lot of sense. Again, it goes back to what are your goals? And so if the internship, let's say you're looking at sort of making more of a career change or getting in with a certain type of company, and the internship's an important piece of that, then a more traditional 2-year program or something, or look at 1-year programs if there's some type of experiential learning or something that will meet those needs. But with 10 years work experience, the 1-year versus 2-year is less about the work experience and kind of more about somebody's academic background and how much they will learn that's new in the MBA program.
Yeah. And it could, with 10 years, it could also make sense to look at like a working professional program. So part-time, like the weekend executive at Duke, and that, I think a lot of those programs are shifting, in terms of providing career services and helping with a transition. So there's a number of things to consider there for sure. And we have another question about applying now. This person would have 7 years of experience at matriculation in 24, or wait to apply next year if targeting M7, and I do not have a good GMAT score yet. So I have a few thoughts about that. I think my general recommendation is typically apply when you are the very best candidate. I think this year with 7 years at matriculation is probably ideal for a 2-year program. I think in this case, maybe it's not round one if you really need to focus and solely on the GMAT. I think round 2 could be an option. I think that would be a great thing to talk through on one of our free consultations with Fortuna, just to learn a little bit more about your background specifically and what your goals are. And we'll have that email at the end of the presentation.
Yeah. No, and I think in terms of your professional experience, 7 years is good. I think the key thing is what will change in a year. And so beyond just maybe test score, is there something that you can demonstrate more leadership experience? Do you anticipate a promotion? Are there some other things that will help you? And similar, I just saw the question pop up about, is 4 years little? Not necessarily. And it depends. I think, average might be around 5 years right now, but definitely see students with 3 to 4 years of work experience. And some of that depends on what's your entire professional journey. And so in what ways, even when you were in college and undergraduate, how were you gaining leadership experience? How were you making an impact? How were you starting to build your professional path? And so if it's a strong story to tell, 4 years could make a lot of sense. And also, what are your goals? If this is the right time personally and professionally, and you can make that case, then you will become a very strong candidate.
Yeah. And just keep in mind that averages are just that. They're averages. There's always going to be people with more experience and less experience, and with better GMATs and lower GMATs. So it really, schools really are looking at the entire package and entire story. And that's where, working with a coach can be really helpful to help you figure out, how to tell that in a way that resonates with the schools.
Yeah, shall we jump into testing? There's a lot of interest in this. And I even saw a question about the GMAT Focus Edition. So testing has been, in many ways, the role that it plays and even the different formats has evolved a lot in recent years. So, GMAT has for a long time been kind of that standard bearer that most people take the GMATs. But there are some, trends to pay attention to. So GREs have also been accepted, but some schools they're sometimes backing away from some of that. So the percentage of students that are submitting GREs has declined recently. And then the percentage of students, just the test taking of the GMAT, has declined quite a bit. So that is what's left. It's kind of led the GMAC organization to create the Focused Edition. I think they talked with, over 50 professionals and others, and really to understand the role of the test at the schools and otherwise, and came up with it's going to be a slightly shorter test, going from 4 sections to 3. I think more of this, the new part on data insights and less on there was a writing section before, or sort of writing analysis section. So one of the things to think about with testing is kind of looking at the different options. There's also the EA, so the executive assessment. So I think someone had mentioned, 10 years of experience. Depending on the schools, if you have a certain number of years work experience, you can take the EA instead. My sense from what I've read about the GMAT Focus is that Focus Edition probably is trying to bring it a little more in line with the EA. And because they realize that students kind of it's a little shorter test, it is more focused. It's kind of starts to almost in some ways give credit to your past professional experience. So as you were thinking about testing, it plays an important role, but it's, first and foremost, it sort of shows this it's representative of academic aptitude. And so if you have a strong undergraduate, strong college record, in terms of GMAT, have been in sort of a competitive program and major, it might play a little less of a role. But if it's something that, you're more of a low B average, you might have had a C or 2, the testing that shows, okay, I can master these different areas starts to become more important. So, scores in math and analytical skills, if you aim to be competitive within that sort of 80% range is good. What you can do in terms of if whether it's testing or other academic performance to kind of mitigate this, if that's a concern, or let's say you don't have a real quantitative background from undergraduate education, is look at pre-business classes. And especially right now. So even think about if there are courses, whether it's, Coursera or LinkedIn or some things at badges that just sort of show you are a continuous learner. And then are there programs that you could take actually that could have a letter grade that might actually lead to a recommendation, that if you feel that academic recommendation is going to be important. And this is going back a ways, but it's something that I did when I applied. I went to Chicago Booth, so a very quantitative program. My undergraduate was political science. I did not have as much math in undergrad. And so I took a stats class at NYU when I was working in New York. prior to applying to business schools. And it also showed I could submit my grade from that. So not only kind of demonstrated this commitment, but also this ability. So that's something to think about. I think there was a question earlier about, should I wait for, the Focus edition. Now, from what I've read, I don't think that is being rolled out until towards the end of this year. So it is, I think if you're intent on applying for this cycle, I would say move ahead with the GMAT. Again, GRE might make sense depending on which school. And to, the other question in terms of, again, increasing chances with low GPA, look at what other academic credentials you can kind of amass and work on between now and then. But really until, I don't think the Focus Edition GMAT is going to matter much to the admissions committees. If anything, again, I wouldn't necessarily wait for that because they are still accepting the current edition. And what you could do if for some reason you want to up your performance and then test again with the new one, you could always supply those new scores.
I also put a quick plug in for MBA math too. That's another fantastic way to show that you are able to do the work. There's a pre-post test, once, and you can have that submitted to the schools. A lot of schools will recommend that if you're waitlisted, so you can kind of proactively do that as well. So lots of options. And we are going to get to recommenders. I see a question about that. I think you addressed the background in like having a quant background and whether or not that is advantageous and comes into play. We've got a question about merit scholarships and how they're awarded. Are they awarded in round 2 and round 1 and round 2, or just round 1?
Yeah, having the merit scholarships can be few and far between. So it definitely have to be just an outstanding candidate. And it's typically, if it's a high in demand profile, so it might be a certain business profile, maybe a certain geography or, certain types of backgrounds. It's less about rounds and more if they've kind of found if there's an individual that they really want to encourage attendance. But I think that's it kind of depends on the school, and there are some that have even other scholarships you could apply for. So I think that's something to look at. But typically, if it's a top school that you're interested in, you think you might be eligible for a scholarship, I would then prioritize that for round 1.
Definitely, or the early action. I know with Fuqua,
Yes.
a number of folks get scholarships in early action. It also just shows a certain commitment to the school, and I think especially with a school like Duke or Tuck, where it's more about, or just a smaller program, so more about fit, and they really want to know you want to be there, and so getting that application in early and really showing your commitment to the program can be helpful. But I would definitely say, if you can, early action around 1.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I'm looking at the question about internships. And that may be something, let's talk, Catherine, if you want to talk about shaping the MBA story, because this might be something we can address in that.
Yeah. And I would say this international exposure is huge, and working in 5 different countries, I think for most schools is going to be a huge plus, right? Because a lot of people go to the MBA program to get that international exposure. That's part of their reason for attending. So, I mean, it is part of your story. and really thinking about, when you start to think about, why an MBA and why this school, it's important to be clear and take the time to self-reflect and identify, the skills and unique experiences that you are bringing to the table. And so international exposure and working in different countries would be one of those experiences that, you are coming into business school with. We want to think through what you need from an MBA, right? And then ultimately, how does that translate into your short-term and long-term goals post-MBA? Mm-hmm. I think many of the schools at this point have kind of shifted the focus to short-term. I think that's just a function of the world that we live in. Things are changing so rapidly, that long-term career vision, the chances of those, we don't even know if jobs are going to exist in 10 years. So if you have a longer term vision, it's great to share that, but it's not the requirement, I think, for a lot of schools that it used to be. And also thinking through other options, right? Not all schools will ask this, but Duke, UNC Keenan-Flagler, a number of schools have added the "what's your plan B" question. Mm-hmm. So if things don't work out, what are the other alternatives that you've considered, right? I think a lot of times we feel like, we're going to business school because we don't know what we want to do next, right? That's the whole point. We're going to go and we're going to explore and we're going to learn a little bit about a lot of things. And that is very true. I mean, I think I would say, over half of the students, when I was at Duke, came in and really were undecided. And that's okay. That is part of it. But to shape your story and to engage with admissions, you need to be clear about these things, the skills and experiences that you have, how the MBA will complement it, and then how that translates from a post-MBA job standpoint. I know at Duke and at other schools, if admissions was on the fence or unsure about whether a story made sense and whether they could help this person find a job, they would call in the dean of the career center and she would review the application as well to say, yes, this makes sense based on the person's story, or I worry this could be maybe a bit of a long shot. So even if you go in and change your mind, that's totally fine. Nobody's going to follow you around with your essay and say, no, you said marketing, go back here. But they want to see that you've thought through this and have a clear story, because if you have the fundamentals, you'll be able to figure it out once you get there.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good segue to the next question about essay. Our next slide. Yeah.
And I was just going to do a quick plug for us at Fortuna too. We have tons of tools to help you with this in terms of self-assessment, identifying strengths, weaknesses, motivations, career interests, all of that stuff. So that's one of the advantages of working with us, as well as kind of having someone dig into that with you and help kind of crystallize this story.
Mm-hmm.
Essays.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, and so essays, that becomes the main way that you are telling your story. So going back to the question that came up about, this candidate with experience working in 5 different countries, what about that kind of shapes your story? So your, many essays might ask about, why the MBA, and also what you plan to do afterwards. So how have those experiences shaped you? There's questions, what matters to you most and why? 25 random things from the Fuqua application. So these are, these are chances, either in the longer form. So, the full essays that are, several hundred words, like you'll have with the Stanford, with Chicago Booth, with Harvard. Those are sort of really shaping and telling that cohesive story. So, this goes back to sort of that early, and, as we think about timing, what I'd say right now, if you look at from now until that first week of June, really taking this time to what we say, to brainstorm these factors that have shaped you, personal and professional life. So again, I worked with a candidate he's now a student at the Wharton Executive MBA program. And one of the things that, and it was actually one of the short essay questions, but schools are really interested in is how are you creating an inclusive environment, or how do you build equity? So diversity, equity, and inclusion. And because again, businesses, there are people from different ethnic, racial backgrounds, now very global as well. And there's been a recognition in recent years that we need more leaders that know how to bring out the best in others, know how to help people feel welcomed and included and part of the team. And so I was working with this young man who had professionally a fairly traditional work trajectory. And and he talked about some things that he did at work to help inclusion, particularly he was in a consulting firm and helping some of the women in the firm and promoting those events. But then as we were reflecting more on his story, he very early on, he came as an immigrant to the US and was in some situations where he experienced exclusion. And he was on the outside. He didn't really fit in any one community, in the sort of church community that was very ethnic, and his school community that was many, American-born children and things like that. And so it started to become this interesting story that he could talk about the roots of his inclusive values. And so think about that also from a professional standpoint. That if there are certain things, it's a person, an experience, you watched a parent do something, you had a role model that starts to, again, tell your story, being very authentic. And having, and I'm sure Catherine has as well, I've worked with candidates from all over the world, with MBA candidates. And sometimes depending on culture, you might be a little hesitant to share an example where it's like, that didn't work out so well, or I kind of screwed up, or I didn't, and it's like, you know what, it's more, what did you learn from it? How did you come back from that? How did you grow from this experience? The admissions committees, they want to get to know the real you. And if it's all just sort of a pretty picture, I did this, then this, and this, that may not be the full story, and that may not stand out. And so being able to connect with the reader, and then, work with a thought partner, kind of brainstorm partner, a writing partner as needed, someone to help edit. Again, that's something that we do in our consulting work, but there's others you can work with that will really help you shape this story and make sure it holds.
Mm-hmm. And regarding the 25 random things, that's a question about that. And I would say, everything that Julia just said applies in terms of that essay, right? Wanting to connect. This is your opportunity to connect with the reader. We want to highlight some of these things that have made you who you are. How have you overcome adversity? How have you, created an inclusive community, right? Showing specific things that align with the values of the program. It's a great place to highlight international experience. Mm-hmm. But what we want to do is make sure that we're not repeating things that are on the resume. We're not bragging. We're sharing a nice mix of things that show our values, showcase our personality. Some things may be one-liners. I still remember my friends tell me my handwriting looks like typewriter font. That was from 6 years ago. I still remember that one. I just thought it was funny and quirky. And then, I also remember this longer bullet from another client who talked about hiking in India, and he met up with a group of people, and they were all hiking individually, and they all spoke different languages, but they communicated via Google Translate and are still friends. So that one was 3 or 4 lines. So it it's sharing that nice mix of things that really show who you are and what's important to you, while also, being a little silly and
yeah. Have a little fun with it.
Yes.
Yeah. What's going to, because again, and my work on sort of the admissions committee actually started as a student. I was at U Chicago when I was a Booth student. I was in the Dean Student Admissions Committee, and some of it. And then when we talk about candidates, it's like a couple things. What was memorable, but also it's that like, I want to meet this person and find out more and talk about it. And so this going back to a question that Pooja asked, key things we should keep in mind when selecting our business schools, really thinking about how you are going to connect your personal story to that school and what that school offers. So I've worked with many, many candidates. They're like, want to apply to Harvard. And some go through and apply with it. Some, when I ask why, because it's Harvard, it's so reputable, it's this. And then when we start to dig into, again, but there might be certain things, it's like, wow, well, yeah, Harvard also has the Kennedy School of Government, and you've got a policy background, and Harvard makes sense. But really think about, so Pooja, what I recommend to you and others is, again, thinking about that sort of connection. And so again, as these next few weeks, you're thinking about yourself, you're also doing the homework on the schools. And so, as Catherine had mentioned earlier, if there's as much as you can attend sort of live events, so you get the credit for these online info sessions and stuff, but also download the videos, read the blogs, dig deeper to learn more, read some of the professors' work, go look at their thought leadership stuff, so then you can start to be like, okay, I know I'm sort of this entrepreneurial person. I want to make an impact in this type of finance and and this professor is doing some really cool stuff, or I really admire this, and that will start to help you hone your list.
Yes. And we have a question about a career break and how that's perceived by the admissions committee and whether that would affect the profile. Would that be a negative thing? I would say not at all. This is the world that we live in. Companies grow, companies, lay people off, companies disappear altogether. So no, it's how it's addressing it. And it's also a question in the online application. Do you have a significant break in your full-time work experience, and why? The key is, what did you learn from it? And, what did you do during that time, right? Even, there's things that we could do, whether that's, I've had a number of folks who were taking care of, ailing relatives. I've talked with plenty of folks who were laid off and had to, look for a job, but they were also engaged in community service and doing some things to stay active. So it's really just being clear about what you did with that time and what you learned.
Yes. And I guess the kind of final point on essays is most, if not all, applications will say, is there something that we haven't addressed or you haven't addressed through this app? So if there's something like that and there's not a direct question, you have a career break that you feel might stand out in your resume, perfect place to write about it. Or if there's another thing, again, it might be an academic performance, something that happened. It might be a little more about your background. But also, I've worked with many applicants who, haven't used that section. So don't feel like you need to. Really, I think it's sort of this less is more, being very intentional about exactly what goes in to your application.
Do not over-explain. That's not what we want to do in that case. I know we've got 10 minutes and so I want to keep moving here. We had a question about recommenders and how many you need. It's going to be 1 or 2 in most cases. And then so what you want to do is read the instructions, obviously. So, Fuqua used to have 1 required, 1 optional. Now it's 1 required. So we don't submit that extra 1 anymore. Some schools require 2. I think in general, they will say, your current supervisor is ideal. But there are going to be cases, I've had plenty of cases where, clients are not comfortable asking their direct supervisor for whatever reason, or maybe your direct supervisor just joined the company and they've only been there 6 months. So, that doesn't make sense. They can't really speak to, your value add or how you stand out from other people because they're just starting to figure everything out. So, we can always write a quick essay about, in that optional essay about why your direct supervisor is not one of your recommenders. I think ideally we want to get them as much notice as possible. So, identifying who those folks are going to be and approaching them to ask if they would be willing to be a recommender. And if so, giving them the list of schools, the deadlines, and the questions that will be asked so that they can use the time effectively to prepare. These are busy people and we want to respect their time and make sure they're able to write something that's impactful. And to that point, it's often helpful to just be proactive and hand them some talking points, right? Here are the questions. Here are some of the things that I feel like might be worth highlighting in terms of specific examples of how you compare to folks in similar roles, or especially the feedback question, the critical feedback question. You once told me this and, it's really helped me. I've, applied that feedback in XYZ manner and now, have been more successful. So a lot of times these folks mean well and they're more than happy to do it. But what we see if you don't provide them the specifics and give them time is that they stay very high level and talk about what a wonderful person you are and how they love working with you. But this is really an opportunity, to enhance your story and to kind of reiterate some of these key points that you're highlighting. So giving them the notice and giving them the talking points is huge.
Yeah, and that focus of if there's a couple of strengths that you want to make sure, if you think that's a quantitative, it might be seen as a weakness, but you have examples with this recommender where you've worked on stuff, you just say, you can be, provide them some helpful guidance on it because they'll want to know. And we work with candidates in how they can brief their recommenders as best as possible. So I think those are all great things. I think I know just in the interest of time, we've got 2 more slides left. I'm just with the resume and online application, I'm going to go super fast so we can just bit about interviewing. This
we have tons. I was going to say, sorry to interrupt.
Resources we have, and there's a lot of, but it's kind of a concise format, typically keeping the resume to 1 page. The online application, I think we just recommend once you have honed your list of schools, and you might still be a ways off with certain, with the essays, take a look at the online application and really start to plan for it, because sometimes there's a lot of little details. There might be things that you need to get information on. Don't hold off to the last minute. But that's just, and each one is different.
Yes. Yes. And just a quick point that on the resume, we want to be accomplishment focused. They obviously know in general what most jobs entail. They've read a ton of these. They want to know how you have added value versus here are all my responsibilities. There is a section in the online application where you list those responsibilities and such, but the 1-page resume is not where we want to do that.
Great.
Okay. And video essays and interviews.
Yeah.
Is that me?
Well, and I'll jump in real quick. There are some questions, and we've just got a few minutes left. But I think, it was, one of our participants just said, hey, it's discouraging not to get a call And it's hard. And so I think what I'm actually glad to see is that more applications are having some type of video essay component. And so it becomes less of a filter out. So really think about, look at those schools, really spend some time sort of shaping what your story might be. Now they can often be last minute prompts that you have to respond to. But if you're not invited to interview, you won't typically get that feedback on the why. And it doesn't mean that there's, a mistake in the application. It comes down to somewhat of a numbers game, and just, you're evaluating, you're thinking about what could I have done better. What you can't control is the, any number of other applicants that they've got a little something that you didn't have and that this school's looking for. There's things. So really think about when you can tell your story through the video essay, you can do that. When it comes time for the interview, we have a number of interview materials and prep and things, and it's about practicing so you feel very comfortable, but also making it natural, that you are happy, and I have been on a lot of my career has been outside of higher ed. I've managed and built many different teams and stuff. So I've been on the hiring side. I've also been a job candidate. And when I can go in there and just be, in some ways excited and have fun with it and be like, this is a great conversation and I know it's a perfect fit and I can't wait to share that with them and make a connection with the interviewer and make sure I'm really listening to them and it's an engaged conversation. That helps you stand out.
And I would say where you can take advantage of the open interview period, Duke has an open interview period. Talk, if you apply by a certain date, you're guaranteed an interview. These things they matter. And it shows you're being proactive. It shows that you are committed to the program. And it gives you that chance, especially if you maybe think, gosh, if I could just sit in front of somebody and tell the story, I think it would resonate, then make sure you're applying in those cycles so you have the chance to make that human connection.
Yeah. And just as you're wrapping up, if you're watching this on YouTube or other things, please like the video. That helps as others like you that are looking for helpful advice. Really appreciate that, the GMAT Club will support events like this because again, it's important and, we hope it's been helpful for you.
Yeah, and please feel free to sign up for, a 30-minute strategy session. It's you just go to our website, fortunaadmissions.com/free consultation, and they will be happy to set up a time because we realize all of you are unique individuals with your own unique backgrounds and questions, and so we're happy to give you some insight. So thank you so much for attending and for all your great questions.
Yeah. And again, you'll be able to also, go in the Fortuna Admissions website if you like to, the free consultation, our information's there as well. And glad to hear that for many of you, this has been helpful, but wishing you the best of luck. You're at a perfect time to be embarking in this journey. And again, we look forward to hearing from some of you. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.